Hi, I recently saw a video on YouTube which was basically trying to refute the idea that wives were supposed to submit to their husbands. So I'm making a video now about wives submitting to husbands. I know this is not a popular topic in a lot of circles, and it's funny. I saw a Bible study, some Bible study materials a while back, and it said in the Bible study materials, it talked about Ephesians 5, and basically it said this. Now, a lot of preachers will really emphasize the importance of wives submitting to their husbands, but let me tell you, buddy, this command that husbands love their wives more than Christ, like Christ loves the church, is a really big command, and that's a lot bigger burden on men than it is on women. And then it skips over the whole wife submit to your husband's issue and goes on to talk to the men about loving their wives. And I thought, this isn't true, not in my experience. It's not true that a lot of preaching and a lot of teaching said it really emphasizes for wives to submit to their husbands. No, whenever I hear that taught on in church, what really happens is, and what usually happens is the preacher kind of reads that and then says, there's been a lot of preaching about wives submitting to their husbands, and I'm sure you've heard a lot about that. But let me tell you, buddy, this verse about husbands loving their wives as Christ loves the church is a much bigger responsibility, and it's a lot bigger thing that men need to be concerned with. And then they skip over the wives submitting to husbands part and emphasize the importance of the man loving his wife. And that may be a very valid argument that that's a much bigger responsibility. To love somebody like Jesus loves somebody is a huge responsibility. But I don't think it's good if churches just skip over the wives submit to your husband's part just because, well, I mean, the preacher, maybe it's not a popular topic and the preacher's a little uncomfortable. Unless you went to maybe an independent Baptist church growing up or a Church of Christ church growing up, or maybe if you're 10 or 15 years older than I am, or maybe went to church in the 50s or 60s, you might have heard a lot of preaching on it. But if you go to evangelical churches or just a variety of churches nowadays, if you hear people read that verse in Ephesians 5 about wives submitting to their husbands, it gets glossed over a lot. I haven't heard a lot of messages that explain how do you do that and what does it look like. So it seems to be just an ignored passage. So I'd just like to take a look. There's a couple of passages on it. There are a few passages on it. One's in Colossians. I think it's Colossians 3. There's Ephesians 5. And there's 1 Peter chapter 3. Ephesians 5, one is in around verse 22. So anyway, these are some passages that you can look at. And I'm going to look at 1 Peter chapter 3. Well, I'll back up a little bit. If you just when you're studying alone, you can maybe start at verse 13. Up there, it talks about in those verses it says, "Submit yourselves to the Lord's sake to every authority instituted among men, whether to the king as the supreme authority, or to governors who are sent by him to punish those who do wrong, and to commend those who do right." So first, and then he goes on. He talks about submitting to. He's talking about submitting to authorities. Then he says in verse 18, "Slaves, submit to your masters with all respect, not only to those who are good and considerate, but also to those who are harsh." Verse 19, he says, "For it is commendable if a man bears up under the pain of unjust suffering because he is conscious of God. But how is it to your credit if you receive a beating for wrong and endure it? But if you suffer for doing good and you endure it, this is commendable before God." So he talks about first submitting to government, slaves submitting to their masters, even those who are harsh. So this is definitely passages on submission. And then he talks to wives. He says, "Wives, in the same way, be submissive to your husbands, so that if any of them do not believe the word, they may be won over without words by the behavior of their wives." So we see here one of the benefits of wives submitting to their husbands is that if there's an unbeliever or somebody who's disobedient to the word, it doesn't say unbeliever, it says, well, in this translation it does say do not believe the word, but some translations say, I believe it say are not obedient, but they can be won over by the behavior of their wives. When they see the purity and reverence of your lives, and it says your beauty should not come from the outward adornment such as a braided hair and the wearing of gold and jewelry and fine clothes. Instead it should be that of your inner self, the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is in the sight, which is of great worth in God's sight. So it says a meek and quiet spirit in King James version, and here it says a gentle and quiet spirit. You know, I just reading this passage, it just occurred to me that, and also, reading Ephesians 5, if a husband does what he's supposed to do in a marriage, and a Christian husband and a Christian wife, and if a Christian wife does what she's supposed to do in a marriage, that pretty much eliminates arguing and fighting. And on the husband side, if you're loving your wife like Christ loves the church, can you really imagine Jesus yelling and screaming to get his point across? I mean, if somebody's about to get hit by a bus, sure, you're going to yell. If it's something like that, yeah, but, is Jesus going to use put downs and insults, demean somebody that he loves? Can you really see that? I mean, sure, he called the Pharisees said woe to you and all those kind of things. But, yeah, with his own disciples, he did rebuke them at times, but I just can't imagine him just yelling at his disciples, even at Judas when he said, "You betray the Son of Man with a kiss." I think he probably whispered that instead of screaming it at him. So then when it comes to the wives part, in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 33, it says, "However, each one of you must also love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband." And the word for respect is a word that's used to refer to, it's translated reverence in other places, reverence, or you might say the fear of God, or fear of governments, or reverence for government, and a reverence for God, reverence for kings. So that's, and then it's used for wives towards husbands. So there's a respect, there's a reverence, and the wife is supposed to submit to her husband. It says in Ephesians 5:22, "Wives, submit to your husband as to the Lord." And a wife shouldn't chew out the Lord or yell at the Lord, and she's submitting to her husband, who's just a human being, um, who's not divine like Christ is. But she's supposed to submit to the Lord by submitting to her husband. So and have this respect, and she's supposed to have a meek and quiet spirit. So if she has that, then she's not going to be saying yelling at him. If she has a criticism, she'll say it in a respectful manner, because she's supposed to respect her husband and reverence her husband. And I just think of, well, I think of somebody that I know who's married, and I think of their relationship when I talk about the need for a meek and quiet spirit. But I also think of Mr. Spacely off the Jetsons. His wife calls him up on the TV phone, and or whatever his name is, I don't know what Mr. Space's name, and just starts yelling at him and chewing him out. And that's, not a meek and quiet spirit. So that's, if you're dealing with the person as like an authority figure, you're not going to yell at your boss. Slaves don't yell at their masters. They're supposed to submit to them. Certainly, in Old Testament times or New Testament times, the person wouldn't yell at the king or yell at the governor if you're the subject of the governor. And children are supposed to yell at their parents, and so you're not supposed to yell at or argue in an argumentative manner, in a disrespectful manner. You're not supposed to talk to the other person that's in authority in that sort of way. So anyway, if husbands loving their wives and wives submitting to their husbands can eliminate arguing in the marriage, unless somebody slips up, and then we're supposed to forgive each other, because Jesus said to forgive one another. So it says, verse 5 of 1 Peter chapter 3, "This is the way that the holy women of the past, who put their hope in God, used to make themselves beautiful. They were submissive to their own husbands." So that's the way to be beautiful. Instead of the plastic surgery, instead of the augmentations, and the adding cups and adding Botox and all that, they were made beautiful by submitting to their husbands. Like Sarah, who obeyed Abraham and called him her master. So this illustrates the extent of her submission, is in obedience, and even recognizing that he was her master, the Lord of the home, her Lord or master. It says Lord in the King James. So it says, "You are her daughters if you do what is right and do not give way to fear." And I can see why that there could be fear in this, especially I could definitely see it in an American context where you're used to everybody having the same rank and having equal power and power struggles and all that kind of stuff. And then if the woman reads this and says, wow, I'm supposed to be submitting to my husband, and then she gets afraid. What if my husband makes a mistake and I submit to him? I yield to his decision when he makes a decision for the household. Or what if, he might just trample all over me? He might say, if I tell him I want to submit to my husband, then he may just tell me to lick the dirt out from under his toenails or something like that. This is terrifying. And of course, if he's loving you as Christ loves the church, he's not going to do it. And you've got a real ogre of a husband. You just might want to submit to him and not talk about it for a while and see how it goes. But if you have a godly husband, he should have a godly appreciation. If he reads the passages here, he should have a godly appreciation for his wife submitting to him. And if he's a loving husband, then he'll know better than to take advantage of that. It's like if you lived in a kingdom where the king had all authority and all power, and there's a man who marries the king's daughter. Is he going to mistreat the king's daughter if the king has power of life and death over everybody in the kingdom? Is he going to be domineering and mean and talk down to her? Not if he knows what's good for him. And if there's a man who worked for a company and he worked for the CEO, or he worked for the owner of the company, reported directly to the owner of the company, and the owner of the company said, I've got a manager that I want to work for you. I want you to take good care of this manager because she's my daughter. Is this vice president of the company? Is he going to boss his boss's daughter around in a demeaning way, call her names and all that kind of thing? No, he's been given responsibility for her, but if he knows what's good for him, he's not going to do that, because he should respect the fact that this is the boss's daughter. And any godly man should respect the fact that his wife is the boss's daughter. His wife is God's daughter. She's a Christian woman, then he needs to treat her as a child of the Lord. And it says in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 7, husbands, in the same way be considerate as you live with your wives, and treat them with respect, as the weaker partner, and as heirs with you of the gracious gift of life, so that nothing will hinder your prayers. And that's something that can really get in the way of prayers, is if you mistreat your wife, if you're not honoring your wife and respecting your wife properly, then that can hinder your prayers. So you don't want a problem with the boss. You don't want a problem with the Lord. So you treat your wife appropriately. But as far as verse 6, we were saying, if you do what is right and do not give way to fear. Now, it doesn't say for wives to submit to their husbands, only if the husbands love them as Christ loves the church. Here, Peter said to submit to husbands who are unbelievers, or who do not obey the word. So I can imagine, especially if your husband was an unbeliever, that there would be fear in submitting to him. And when it comes down to submitting to God or to man, of course you submit to God. But 99% of the time, for most people, some women, when they hear submit to your husband, they say, but if he tells me to smoke crack and kill somebody, I don't have to do it, right? And then, their husband is this nice guy who doesn't smoke crack or kill people. But they just want to jump to the most extreme case of, okay, now when do I not have to submit? And then back off. Okay, what about this? 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 Okay, I don't have to submit at all. Okay, good. No, that's not what the attitude is. Submit to your husband and everything as unto the Lord. You're doing it because you're submitting to the Lord, not because your husband's that great. You respect him, not because he's that great. He's a human being. He's got flaws, and you have to accept that, and you have to realize that. You can't just have this idealized idea of what your man's supposed to be like. But you're submitting unto the Lord. And then you trust in the Lord. And that's why you don't fear, because you trust in the Lord to work and to operate through that in your life. And then, it takes a strong woman. I mean, I'm a man, but I respect, like my wife, that she can submit. It takes an internal strength to to yield what you want to do, and to go yield to what the other, to yield to that other person, to have a submissive attitude. I don't boss my wife around. I'm not domineering towards my wife, and I try to love her as Christ loves the church. But I can see that it just takes a strength to be able to do that. And men have to do the same thing when the Lord leads us to do something, or when there's somebody who's in authority in our lives. and we have to give up what we want to do in order to submit to that. But women have to do it in the house on a daily basis to submit as unto the Lord. So anyway, I hope this video has been a blessing to you. Share it with somebody if you think it'd be a blessing to them. God bless you.